gotten 1 billion internet users or potential internet users out there. Gunilla Asprink was supposed to be running this workshop. Unfortunately, she was not able to make it here in person, but she will be co-moderating with me remotely from Australia, and is available on the WebEx, so we will be hearing from her in a second. We have our guests who have joined us, and Gunilla will be introducing them, and I guess that the only thing I should add before turning the floor over to Gunilla is to speak about a few of the house rules. When you take the floor, could you please say your name before you speak, because obviously the transcript needs to be able to attribute what you are saying. And then also the other thing is, I think when Gunilla will be introducing the panel members, I asked them kindly to put their hand up so as to be able to identify them. So thanks very much. And Gunilla, I believe you are able to now make the introductions.
Thank you very much, Olivier, and hello from Australia. I would have loved to have been there in person, but unfortunately funding didn't allow me to do that. And so we're going to have an interesting session with me as a remote co-moderator and Olivier, and I'm delighted Olivier's taken on the role of local co-moderator. And so without any further ado, I just wanted to talk a bit about the aim of this workshop, and that's to discuss the role of disability in internet governance, remembering, as Olivier's already said, that 1 billion people globally have a disability. And we heard on Tuesday, for some people who might have attended the Dynamic Coalition on Accessibility and Disability and the G3 ICT workshop. And we have Andrea Sachs who can elaborate on that. At that workshop, there were many important points about people with disability and ICT accessibility that were raised from a policy and regulatory perspective. So this workshop can use that excellent evidence base to put a stake in the ground for the inclusion of disability in the multi-stakeholder debate on internet governance. It's a very small voice right now, and we need to see what we can do to increase the voice. So we want to hear the best mechanisms to ensure that through key civil society and technical community processes, the disability voice is heard. And if we just remind ourselves about the United Nations Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disability, under the General Obligations point 4.3, it actually states that states parties shall closely consult with and actively involve persons with disabilities through their representative organisations. And with this plus 10, there's also very clear wording about the role that vulnerable people have, including people with disability, in being part of the shaping of the information society. So we have here a panel, and I'm absolutely delighted to be introducing the panel members. And let's see, I see you as very small figures in the far distance, but I think I can recognize you. So this is just in a random order and not in the order you're seated. I'll just go through and introduce you and then ask you to speak. Marcus Kummer, the Senior Vice President of the Internet Society. Thank you. Now I know you're actually there. And Andrea Sachs, the coordinator of the Dynamic Coalition of Accessibility and Disability. Thanks, Andrea, I see you. And Olivier Crépin-Leblanc, who is the chair of the At-Large Advisory Committee in ICANN. Thank you. and Satish Babu, who is the Director of International Centre for Free and Open Source Software. And we also have a remote panelist, Shadi Abu Zara, the activity lead of the Web Accessibility Initiative in the W3C office. Andrew Peake was unable to be with us at the last minute and suggested a replacement, Grace Githiaga, who unfortunately I don't think has arrived yet, but I just wanted to mention her name.
She's here. She's here. She just arrived.
Oh, fantastic. Okay. All right. Great. And I also wanted to note we have Deirdre Williams as the remote moderator to assist all of us who are remotely participating from various parts of the world. So I think then it's time to hear from each of the panelists just for a few minutes about their perspectives on disability inclusive policies from their own organisation or their own perspective. And I will start in the order that I started the introduction. So, Marcus, over to you, please.
Thank you for that, Gunilla. It's nice connecting with you, although you're far away. Yes, I'm not an expert on these issues, but I have recognized early on how important they are and how important it is to make the technology and to make use of all the standards that exist to enable people with disabilities to access the internet. We have always worked very closely with the Dynamic Coalition when I was at the IGF Secretariat for the Dynamic Coalition for Accessibility for People with Disabilities, and I'm very happy to be sitting next to Andrea. She has always chased me up to make sure that we live up to her expectations, and we were not always able to do so, I know that, but I think it's important that you keep pushing. Now, basically my point is that we really try and do our utmost to bring this to the attention of the broader community. And yes, we are nice people here in the room, but it is a relatively big room and it is not very full. I mean, it is a shame that not more people are here. So my basic question would be, how do we take it back to the center stage? We were very successful in Sharm el-Sheikh, I do remember that, where we had a main session on this issue. It was very well prepared, had excellent presentations, and I think we ought to be thinking again on bringing this issue to center stage. Not everybody is aware of the importance, and also not every organization that deals in the internet sphere is actually living up to high standards. And I have tried very hard to push my organization, the Internet Society, to revamp their website and to make it compatible with the highest possible standards. There are such standards. It is not rocket science to... Oh, sorry, my apologies. Okay, is that better? Yes. It is not rocket science, but it needs a will, and it needs a constant will to really make sure that the website is always living up to high standards to make it possible for people with disabilities to access the website. And one thought that occurred to me, and this is essentially a thought something that applies to all of the dynamic coalitions. We have started, when we started the IGF, there were those who wanted working groups for having a continuous process, but that didn't fly. There were many who opposed that kind of initiative because they didn't want to have anything that looked like an organization. They saw the IGF as a platform for one annual meeting. So we allowed dynamic coalitions to emerge, and they did emerge, and some of them did actually very good work. And I think your dynamic coalition is an example of a dynamic coalition that did excellent work, but it was always a little bit outside the main structure of the meeting, and we did never discuss in a broad set of the IGF how to bring the dynamic coalitions in the fold and how to find a process that finds the endorsement of the entire community. We tried in Sharm el Sheikh, but it worked only up to a point. I think it was due to chairmanship who could have sort of pushed more for a community buy-in. And I think this is something which we ought to be doing also for the other dynamic coalitions, because some of them have been working for years and have produced guidelines, papers, whatever, but then they have never brought them back to the broader community. And this is something I think we ought to consider, that these are not just your guidelines and papers, but they are really accepted by the broad IGF in a main setting, and I don't think there's any controversy about that. I think most participants would agree that this is important, but we just have to go through the motion and have to go through the process. And I think I leave it at that, and I will listen to the other presentations that will be more to the point and come back as needed. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Marcus. Over to you, Gunilla.
Very much, Marcus. I think you raised a number of important points that we will probably discuss a little bit later in the session. We'll move on to our next panelist, and that will be Andrea Setz. Thank you. I think that's quite appropriate since we just heard a little bit about the work of DCAD from Marcus. Thank you.
Thank you, Gunilla. Am I loud enough? I want to make sure everybody can hear me. Okay, good. Well, that's what I'm going to do. I have to. Okay, thanks, guys. Marcus has just put it on top of my laptop. Anyway, I want to thank Marcus Kummer for the recognition and of my group, and also myself personally. It's been a very difficult, long, hard fight to get certain things done, and then to see them go backwards is very heartbreaking. It's funny you mentioned Sharm el Sheikh, which is spelled with an S, by the way. It's SHARMLEL, separate word, Sheikh, which is SHIEK. I help captioners when I can, because it's impossible to know how to spell everything, and being a dyslexic, I can't spell anything. What I want to say is that we have been trying since we were allowed to be created, to advise the IGF, and Marcus listened, and a lot of times I think the Secretariat does listen, but extenuating circumstances interfere, and host countries may or may not understand the importance of spending the money on making things accessible for persons with disabilities to actually participate. There are several issues. By the way, I did see Nermina from Egypt, and I just told her she and her country did the best accessibility IGF that ever was, as far as access. And Shadi Abu Zara was there. They covered up the ramp, but with a cloth being decorative, but we got that sorted out. But people make funny mistakes because they are not trained. Staff that does the work, and volunteers and interns have to be trained. And since they change every year and you don't have a continuity, we have to do something about institutionalizing different techniques and different plans of action for making it, and this I'm talking about physically accessible, web accessibility, alternate format accessibility, testing of rooms so that persons who cannot use WebEx, and I'm really not trying to name and shame them. Adobe has the same problem. GoToMeeting has the same problem of not being able to have blind people independently access remote participation, and also registration problems. We forgot to mention today CAPTCHA. CAPTCHA is a technique that verifies that you are not a robot. Well, I can't hear very well sometimes, and I'm dyslexic, and I'm stuffed when I try and use CAPTCHA sometimes. And my problem isn't that bad. But we have to find alternate ways of communication between persons with disabilities who wish to attend IGF and participate, and the response back from IGF. And we have to get the MAG on board. The MAG doesn't really, in my opinion, understand. And at the time when we did that wonderful panel, when Marcus was the Secretariat, one of the bigger subjects of that day was multilingualism and getting Arabic on the web. So everybody has different priorities, and the problem also is that the young people here don't realize that the work we're doing in the Dynamic Coalition is probably going to help them when they get to be as old as I am. I mean, I'm here, if you can see me, I have pretty gray hair, and I've gotten it by doing this job, and I'm finding I have what we call age-related disabilities. A lot of the people here today in Turkey, and the Turkish people and everybody here has been absolutely wonderful, but the building doesn't have to be kissed. The building is a nightmare because of the fact that I can't do stairs, and neither can Judy Okite, who's sitting here, who's been in many, many IGFs with me and has well, she's a part of DICAD. We have become very familiar with the kitchen staff as we wander through after taking the elevator. And a lot of people didn't know that existed, but it's so hard to get that elevator, we didn't tell the able-bodied people that it was there. But that shouldn't be. We need to have mapping. We need to have a situation where people who have a disability can find the elevators, where everybody can find the elevators, where everybody can have signage where they know where to go, where there are people who are well marked personally as guides. There's so many things that need to be institutionalized, and that's why we wrote the guidelines in DICAD, and we have been promised that they can be presented now, that they've been voted on at the closing plenary. And I'm telling you in front of you, Marcus, because I have sent it to Chengitai. He knows about it. He has said that I could probably do that, and I'm hoping it's not just probably, because I'm going to stamp my feet if I can't have that. But he said I could. And I want host countries to open up their wallets and understand that they have to provide for persons with disabilities, and IGF has to have more money given to it by countries for accessibility to train staff. Am I going over my 5 minutes? Because I can do that. Okay, I get the feeling, I can sort of feel a chairman's vibration. I want to close and say, everybody that I have worked with in IGF has always had a good heart and wanting to do things. External problems, or as I say, holding IGF to ransom over finance always has been a problem. So we need to educate the MAG, we need to educate everyone, and make every time we have a plenary, have a speaker that knows about accessibility to keep it in the forefront. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Andrea. Back to you, Gunilla.
Thanks very much, Andrea. And you have raised a lot of very important practical issues that we hope can be addressed in future. I also remember the IGF in Sharm el-Sheikh. I did a workshop there, and it was a very positive experience with a number of different disability workshops, and the inclusion was very good. I'd like to now move on to Olivia Crapin-Leblanc, and maybe Olivia will give us a perspective from ICANN and look at some of those issues. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Gunilla. It's Olivier Crépin-Leblanc speaking. So the ICANN perspective is one which, unfortunately, at the very moment isn't that rosy or wonderful, in that a lot of the work that has been done in redoing websites and the accessibility of all of the material which is presented by ICANN, capacity building material, etc., was not done from day one, from its core inception, as being one that could be accessible for anyone that has disabilities. So there certainly is an enormous amount of work to be done in there. If you don't quite know how ICANN works, it has a staff component that is there to support the community, but any policy or any program development is actually done by the community. The ICANN organization is divided into this set of supporting organizations that have a very focused mind and therefore work only as far as country code domains, generic domains, all of the workings of the naming and the addressing space. And then it has several advisory committees, and one of those committees is the at-large advisory committee that brings forth the interests of internet users. The difference about at-large is that it's able to comment on everything and anything at ICANN, and a group of different people in at-large have recently formed a specific ad hoc working group on disability issues and accessibility issues, which is something that we felt was very important to put together because of the very discussion we're having here. And this group has met on a number of occasions, has had conference calls. The way we work really is actually at face-to-face during the 3 ICANN meetings that take place throughout the year, but mostly through conference calls, through using virtual tools, virtual desktops, and of course the conference calls take place using either the phone or using the online desktop. There is definitely an enormous amount of work needed to bring those conferencing facilities and make them compliant, I think is the first thing. There certainly is work done by the providers of these facilities, but in many cases this just seems to be an add-on and not something that again is in the DNA of the program itself, the software, etc. And therefore anyone with a disability might have not the same experience as someone who would fully participate. So there's some work to be done in that. We've spoken earlier about the accessibility in meetings, another very, very difficult topic, because not only are ICANN meetings very large, but they also have to rotate throughout the world. We have 5 regions, so not all regions take these issues as seriously as other regions, and often you are really looking down to local laws regarding these issues. Accessibility, we've seen the multiplication of staircases in this building. In some countries, there would need to be easier access made possible. With regards to the working group's work, it is an open working group, at large as an open community, so we don't actually ask for people to buy membership or do anything like that. I'm sure, I know that the chairs of the working group are currently, or the chair of the working group is actually currently online and might wish to at some point ask or add to what I've just been saying. But the working group is very active, and it's currently focusing on many of the different issues that we're faced with in a worldwide sense. So that's a quick summary of what we're doing. Ultimately, at the beginning, this is again an at-large initiative. It's an ad hoc working group. We are looking forward to transform this into a standing working group and to actually extend this to a cross-community working group so that other parts of ICANN, perhaps the Government Advisory Committee, perhaps the standing organizations, the ones that do the work, also start subscribing to well, focus on work that would actually bring more people with disabilities to take direct part in the work of ICANN. I know that there are, and I was mentioning this a little bit earlier, there are, I would say, a handful of individuals that are able to take part physically in the ICANN meetings that have some kind of problem to be able to access the meetings, etc. And generally, this has been not a huge barrier, but it certainly has not been easy. This is something that we really need to put into the ICANN search for facilities when they run meetings, but also when they actually have to contract with software manufacturers, when they decide on what type of conferencing facilities, remote conferencing facilities that they make use of. We are very diverse in the at-large community. We span, as I said, the 5 regions. We have also the language barrier, and so the conference calls are also, for the most of them, interpreted in Spanish, in French. We also have Russian interpretation on that. So we're not just looking at a purely Anglo-Saxon perspective, and we generally accept people from all around the world. That's all I can say for the time being, and I might be corrected or more added on, as I said, by the chairs of the working group. Thank you.
Thank you, Olivia. Certainly ICANN has many different facets and a big role to play, and you have covered off a lot of areas where there can be further work, and it's exciting to hear that some of that may happen. I'd be keen to maybe hear from Cheryl Langdon, or the chair of the Accessibility Task Force, a little bit later on when we have our panel discussion. At this stage, I'd like to move along to Shadi Abu-Sara from W3C. While web accessibility isn't everything when it comes to accessibility and participation of disability representatives, it has a key role to play, and one that people always think about first when they think about accessibility. So I'm looking forward to hearing from Shadi about the W3C and the various accessibility initiatives. Thanks.
And Shadi Abu-Zahra is joining us remotely, so do we have Shadi on the line?
It seems that Shadi has dropped out. He was initially on the line, so maybe he will be coming back. I will instead move on to Satish Babu, who is an expert in open source software, and looking forward to hearing from Satish both about the role of open source software and maybe some thoughts about the Indian perspective on accessibility. Thank you.
Thank you, Gunilla. Satish Babu for the record. I work in India, and I work in the domain of free and open source software. And in this case, I'll be touching upon some of the things that we do on a technology front. But before that, a very quick roundup of the situation in India. Just last month, we had the Asia-Pacific Oceania Regional IGF in Delhi. And we did have a session on accessibility, and some of the points that I'm speaking are coming from there. In India, at 10% of the population, we have about 120 million disabled. I was looking at Wikipedia. There are only 11 countries which are larger than that. So we have a very large population of the disabled. Now, disability in India is compounded by several other factors. For example, poverty and lack of livelihoods, lack of education, lack of awareness about the rights, the digital divide itself, and the fact that this is also a point that came through in the regional IGF, that when we talk about bringing in or including the next, in this case, the forgotten billion, each of the next million is more tough, because we're talking about people who have not been exposed, who are probably poorer. So as we cover more and more millions in this billion, we're talking about more and more difficulties in covering them. And when you talk about the disabled in that context, it's even perhaps worse. And therefore, the need for inclusion. Now, the way we've been, in fact, since so many people have been mentioning Sharm el-Sheikh, I also came to IGF for the first time in Sharm el-Sheikh, and I did participate in the sessions that were talked about, and I joined the Dynamic Coalition at that point. And we have been working with the disabled using software on certain aspects. Originally, the work was on screen readers, so that the visually impaired could use systems. And all the work that we've done is in open source. It's been rolled out at the province level as a kind of anything, as a free software that people could download and use from their homes or from their offices, wherever. These days, the work has gone on further to tools for autistic children, a bunch of tools that are working on the tablets and smartphones. One of our participants has been working focused on vibration-based output systems. This is for the deaf-blind people. In fact, the phone starts vibrating in Morse code when an SMS comes in. But simple things are still out of, for example, a use of an ATM to withdraw money. In Indian context, it's not easy for a visually challenged person to use an ATM, because these interfaces are not really kind of in place. But there's some work being done on those. Another innovative area where software has been applied, for this, I don't know whether this counts as disability. This is for palliative care. There's an extensive amount of work being done on mapping the people who are in the terminal stages of various illness, so that they can be covered under this is perhaps technically not disability, but this we would like to kind of talk about it as disabled. Now, coming to the inclusion aspect, there is one superpower that is coming out as a great enabler for disabled people, and this is actually programming, the skill of programming. In India, there are increasing number of programmers who are blind. One of the people who are contributing to a bunch of programs in my own organization is totally blind. And he drives a team of about 20 people under him. Now, he has, of course, learned the hard way, but he now is coming back and saying, I can help train more and more people. Not only to give them employment in the kind of exploding IT industry in India, but also we've seen that this gives them a great deal of self-worth, a feeling of self-worth. So this is something that we have to pursue, and now we are entering an age where even school children are going to be taught programming. So we can't exclude the disabled from that. Then we have talked about several other things. How about sign language? Now, sign language, there is no automated mechanism that a deaf person can use for sign language. So sign language is now in ICANN or in IGF, we can't bring everybody here. People have to use the existing remote participation methodologies. Now, these are actually quite limited. It's limited even for people who are not disabled. So you can imagine the situation for the disabled. Things like closed captions and audio magazines and so on. There are several things. I don't want to kind of take time on this. I'd just like to highlight one aspect of an emerging technology, which is the internationalized domain names, IDNs. Now, IDNs is a welcome step because people would like to compute in their own language. Unfortunately, IDNs actually create a problem for many of the tools that we are using today, for the blind especially, because these software cannot understand all Unicode scripts. And when you open up IDNs, the domain name can be any script. And then the screen reader is going to choke on that. And that will render the URL basically unusable. So this is a point that needs more work. I think I'll stop here because I've taken too much of time. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Satish. Over to you, Ganala. Just mentioning, though, the remote participation flag is up at the moment. Should we take the questions at the end after all of our panelists have spoken?
I think there are actually quite a few questions. We only have, a couple of more speakers, and so if we can hear from them first, and then we might take all the questions, and hopefully after that we'll have some time for general discussion. So I'd like to now introduce Grace Githiaga and ask her to speak. Thank you.
My name is Grace Githaiga from the Kenya ICT Action Network. As you were told in the beginning of this session, I was really not meant to be a speaker, but Adam Peak, who was actually supposed to speak, could not make it and just requested me to come in and fill for him. So you may find some of my comments probably too broad, but he also did give me one point that I need to highlight. I want to, the premise of my comments is that we all need to know that we can become marginalized any day, or we can become physically challenged any time of the day. I have had friends who at one point are okay, then they get into an accident, and the next day they fall into that other category of people with disability. And so for me, I know it's really a fluid situation, and anybody, particularly if you use a car or you travel on a plane, you can actually join that category very easily. And therefore, it's something that we need to always think. And having traveled a couple of times with Judy, I have thought a lot about it, because we have been at airports that do not have a wheelchair to get her out of the plane. And sometimes she has had to be lifted. And there are times I have asked myself, if she was alone and, I was not here at least to keep the conversation going, it can get very lonely. But I've also had a discussion with one lawyer who is a friend of mine, and he's also visually challenged. And he tells me, you people work in policies, but when you work in policies, you never remember us. So he says, for example, you keep inviting me to meetings. Sometimes I don't know where that place is, and I have to get somebody to come and bring me along. And when that person comes, the first thing you ask, who is going to cater for this person? And I think that's really a policy issue. So when we know Judy's coming to a meeting like this, at least Judy is able to walk, or, walk in quotes, she can support. But there are those on wheelchairs, so who pushes them when they come to such meetings? And I think that needs to be in a policy issue. So for me, there are challenges that need to be addressed if we are going to have a digital inclusive society, and points that require efforts or a digital inclusion strategy. And of course, one of them is the whole issue of access. And I will not belabor onto that, because other people have spoken about access. So it's even access to infrastructure, access to resources, access to information, and not just any information, but information that is useful to these people. For example, again, my friend who is visually impaired tells me he looks forward to a day when he will sit and listen to a radio program that reads for him his favorite book or favorite author. And you know, those are some of the things that we have to consider. Now, inclusiveness of all social groups. Again, it's not just people with disabilities, but we talk of gender, and even indigenous people who are also marginalized. Someone's microphone is on.
Yes, someone's computer is on and is it's Shadi's. Okay, so Shadi's back. Okay,
Okay.
Back to you, Grace. Sorry.
Okay. Yeah, inclusiveness of all social groups is really central to any digital inclusion strategy. And I want to give a point that Adam would have spoken about. Most of you know that during the Net Mundial process, one of the things that was criticized was the whole fact that the drafting took too long. However, that drafting did come with an advantage, because it is at that point that the language on the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities was included. It was not included in the earlier draft. And therefore, most of the Net Mundial had been open and people had responded to well in public. But interesting to note is that only in this last minute and in part of that process that many people view negatively, that people with disabilities were recognized in the document. As such, the opening statement of the Net Mundial document on human rights and shared values was actually amended to read, and I will quote the way it is: rights that people have online must also be protected. Rights that people have offline must also be protected online in accordance with international human rights legal obligations, including the International Covenants on Civil and Political Rights and Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights. So this really was an afterthought and a last-minute inclusion. And therefore, if we are going to come up with a strategy, digital inclusion strategy, this really must end. Also, Adam notes that the word financing along the side of capacity building are key requirements to ensure that diverse stakeholders have an opportunity for more than nominal participation. But in fact, gain the know-how and resources of effective participation. As such, finances must be thought about. What I said earlier, if you're inviting Judy to this meeting, she's alone, she needs support, think of also supporting the other person who will be pushing her around. People have been kind, they do that. If you're going to invite up somebody who is visually impaired, think of who will show him around. If it's a building that has no, has no rail or tramp where they can use, let somebody be able to direct them that this is an escalator. So support mechanisms must be provided. And to just wind up, I want to say that ICTs can have a very positive impact on people who are marginalized, on people with disabilities, and their ability to access services and opportunities, and therefore to participate fully in public life. A digital inclusion strategy must therefore take into consideration that technology itself and the content and services made available by ICTs must also be accessible to those with disabilities, and therefore have a very clear provision and mechanism on how this should be achieved. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Grace. And over to you, Ganala.
Very much, Grace. You raised some very important points. It was good to hear about the Net Mundial quotes, but I think the reminder for us all that we're not talking about people with disability as a group over there. We're talking about everyone. We're talking about everyone has the potential to have a disability. We all are getting older, and so we are working on something that will benefit all of us in one way or another. So I think it's an important point. Now, Shadi Abusara is back. He had a computer disaster, but he's managed to get back online, and we look forward to hearing from him about the initiatives of the W3 office and web accessibility. Thank you, Shadi. Thank you, Shadi.
Yeah, thank you, everybody. Apologies for that. My computer crashed, and it's a very good example of how technology is great when it works. So my name is Shadi Katara. I work for the Web Accessibility Initiative of the World Wide Web Consortium. So we're really a technical standards body, and we focus on the technical standards much more than on policies. But I hope I'm not going to. Other colleagues were saying, but I think one of the main issues, from my perspective, is the participation and involvement of people with disabilities when we're talking about the forgotten billion. And this applies throughout. It applies through developing the standards and the technologies and having involvement and participation in there. It also applies to the policy making and actually throughout society. I think it's very common in societies where people with disabilities are non-visible and removed actually from participation in society, that their needs are less well addressed. So it's a bit of a chicken and egg problem. As long as, of course, they're not, we are all not as involved in participatory activities, that our needs are less addressed. I'd like to also pick up on what Gunilla was just saying about the how accessibility benefits everyone. And I think we need to look at that, especially when we think about costs and benefits. If we think about costs, we also have to think about the benefits. And I think the IGF is, again, another very good example where I think I recall that at the beginning, the captioning was being provided for people with hearing disabilities, and we were really asking for it. But I think it had gained so much popularity for people speaking different languages, for people participating remotely, and all sorts of use cases, that it's great to see that all sessions are now being captioned and can be followed online using a simple mobile device and a browser on it to follow the transcript online, even if you can't listen to the audio because you're on your underground or whatever, in an environment where you can't follow the audio. So this is a great example of how accessibility has brought a benefit to society as a whole. And I think, as Marcus was saying earlier, making people aware of that, making organizations, and we have to start with ourselves, we in the IGF community, our own organizations, how much involvement of people with disabilities do we have, regardless if we're technical bodies or policy-making bodies or NGOs or whatever it is, and how well are they represented overall at the IGF and beyond when we go back again to our national bodies and our local communities. So that would be really my pitch for how to achieve more awareness and more integration of the forgotten billion.
Thank you, Shadi. Over to Gunilla.
Very much, Shadi. I think that you covered some points that are really at the crux of this workshop when it comes to involvement of people with disability in the policy-making processes. I neglected to say at the start, when I introduced the panelists, that we are fortunate to have sitting in the audience Bashka Bhattacharjee from Bangladesh, and and we are keen to hear his thoughts. I know he has expertise with DAISY and a number of policy bodies. Can a microphone be given to Bhaskar, please?
Okay, thank you very much. I am Bhaskar Bhattacharjee from Bangladesh. You know, the participation of the people with disabilities in policy making is really bring a change. We can give you some example of our country because of our new Disability Rights Act, which is completely designed and composed and drafted by the people with disability, disabled people's organizations, and our involvement was there. There is a sections have included, that is the ICT accessibility in the Disability Rights Act 2013. And you will be very glad to know that because of our involvement, the government have just for the first time in the history of Bangladesh, all the textbooks now converted in the DAISY standard. That means people can read it by text, digital, full text, full audio digital books, digital braille, Unicode text, etc. So you can see because of the involvement of the people with disabilities, it is just improving. Just we are getting like government have a cabinet decision to make all the documents, government documents in Unicode supported Bangla, as we have now one open source screen reading software called NBDA. Another point you can see, this is the IGF is for the first time I am here in IGF, maybe last time, because I am seeing very less participant by the people with disabilities in IGF. If you count the percentage, it is less than 1.1 something, 00 something. We are not finding many people with disabilities, and you can see in this workshop also we are not getting more participants. It's a big room, but I am not sure how many people are here. So this is the biggest barrier we are facing in the mainstreaming agenda, ICT for development work. People with disabilities voice is not that much. We are seeing very few. And in this IGF is another example. We just today I have attended 2 sessions on disabilities, and this is the only things I have found. But in any other discussions, panelists, we didn't saw the people with disabilities presence. So by these workshops, we must have to have a commitment and loving and advocacy with the IGF, next IGF and organizers, that there will be more participants and attendance and speakers from the disability community, because we don't want to see all the conference of persons with disabilities will be held by their own and accessibility will be ensured in the disability conference. Not like that. We want to be a part of the society, we want to be a mainstreaming, and definitely we want our access in the IGF types activities which are mainstreaming work. And also we want to see us in the ICT for development. The biggest challenge is the access in internet, access informations is biggest challenge, and we have a tools, that is UN Convention of Rights of Persons with Disabilities, and many of the countries already ratified. So we need to get this convention more workable for the people with disabilities, and we people with disabilities want to get involved in the policy level discussion. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Bhaskar. Over to you, Ganesh.
Thank you very much, Bhaskar. I think you hit the nail on the head with a number of points there regarding participation. I participated in the main session yesterday about access, growth and development on the internet, and it was focusing on marginalized groups, developing countries, women. There was really very limited a discussion about people with disability. I raised the question, we had some good interventions from UNESCO, but really, do we want to see panelists as part of those main sessions? These are the sort of questions I think we need to address. And we have some time. I think we only have half an hour or so left. we've had some very good points made by our panelists. So I think for the last half an hour, if we can cover off some of those ways we can work on improving that participation by people with disability in civil society discussions and in technical community discussions. And so I will leave it now to Olivier as the local co-moderator to continue that discussion. I know there are a lot of questions on from the remote participants, and we will have to see how many we can handle. I think there was one about a question about having a Turkish disability organisation speak. I can say that the panel consists half of people with disabilities. The DCAG3 ICT workshop did have a representative from the Turkish Blind Organisation, and he provided some very important information about activities in Turkey. So I think if we can concentrate on some of those main mechanisms to improve the participation of people with disability in internet governance forums, I will leave it there and bring it over to Olivier. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Gunilla. It's Olivier speaking. So, unbeknown to you, just outside the field of vision of both cameras, we've been joined by Judy Okite from Kenya, who is a MAG member and who would be able to share a few of her experiences as a MAG member in the organization of the Internet Governance Forum. And then afterwards, we'll move over to questions, and I'll ask the remote participation moderator to start. And of course, people around the room could put their hand up in order to have either a flying mic, or if they can then come to the table and ask the questions on the table. And of course, my colleagues at the table here are very welcome to jump in at any moment. Judy, over to you. Oh, and the microphone has just unplugged itself. Okay, that happens. Here we go, we're back on. Go ahead, Judy.
Thank you very much. I have been in the MAG now, this is my third year, my last year. It has been a wonderful experience, but in the 3 years, I don't think there was a particular discussion concerning persons with disability within the MAG. I think whenever I do a request for funding, it's always just looked at like the other participants, the way they send in their application. I'm not sure it's been given preference when it comes to disability or whether the person is disabled or not. Whenever I attend the meetings, I always remind Chengetai about the accessibility. And so far, it has been good when it comes to the MAG meetings and the venue. When it comes to the transport and the hotel to the MAG meetings, that's totally out of their hands. So you always have to hope that when you're making your reservations, if they say that they have an accessible room, that will be the case. And then probably it's something that we may need to look into as we renew the 2015 MAG, whether we will have a special seat within the MAG for persons with disability, or whether that is a proposal that can be placed across, so that we make sure that in every MAG there is a person with there's a person representing persons with disabilities. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much for this, Judy. Andrea Sachs wanted to comment on this. Andrea?
Judy, you probably don't know this and nobody else did, but when I was a young woman, before I went back into accessibility, I owned a travel agency for about 4 years. I took a break, in a way. It is possible if IGF assigns someone to deal with, and it's normal in event planning, with accommodation and with an emphasis on accessibility, and works with the host to be able to actually inspect if it's done well enough in advance, and it should become a normal part. Now, that's not exactly written that way in the guidelines, and we can expand it when we revamp them over the next year. But that's not impossible. And I think that one of the things, because the horror story, which I won't go into, that you told about your accommodation this time is appalling. I think that goes into the guidelines again that we have prepared, that we have a task force within IGF for just that sort of logistic, as well as checking the venue, and that it goes into the host agreement, that the host agreement has to be sure that what they advise on hotels and stuff is actually authentic and has been checked. It's one of the aspects that is in the guidelines, and so I wanted to say that to you. And I'll work on that one. Thank you.
Thank you, Andrea. We'll continue with Marcus and then the lady across. Marcus.
Yes, thanks to all the panelists, and thank you, Judy. Well, one thing I think that is important is you need to have advocates. You know, sometimes things don't happen not because people don't mean well, but because they just don't think about it. And I can assure you, when I was still at the Secretariat, and I'm sure Cheng does the same thing, I do know that this time he was not able to go to Turkey often enough on planning missions, but I do remember that we did visit hotels and checked are they accessible. But again, it's not, maybe we didn't have the checklist, we have that now. And that's why this work is important. And your suggestion, for instance, to make sure that there's always a person with disabilities on the MAG is actually a very good suggestion, because we do need advocacy from within to know what is needed. And as I said, the guidelines, I think, will be very helpful in this regard.
Thanks very much, Marcus. So we'll continue, since we're on a flow, with the lady across the table. If you could please introduce yourself, and then we'll go to remote participation questions. I know there are quite a few that are stacking up at the moment. Go ahead.
Hi, everyone. My name is Gulala Rohani, and I'm working with SIDA, the Swedish Development Agency. Yeah, we've been engaged with these questions for many years, but obviously my specific section is working with ICT for development, and I wonder if you have any concrete examples or suggestions how a donor should engage in these questions.
Okay, thank you. So that's a question. Then I'll let our panel members mull on this and come back to you in a moment, and let's go over to remote participation. There are more questions, and then we'll see if we can answer them. Thank you.
We have two questions from Glenn McKnight. The first is addressed to Andrea Sachs. Is there a conference simple guide to make sessions more accessible? We must have best practice. And the second question is, just a moment, please, addressed to Satish Babu. What low-cost FOSS technologies have been developed that improve the lives of the disabled? Are those two enough to be going on with?
Thank you very much, Deirdre. So, well, let's put Satish on the spot and then work backwards from there. So, Satish Babu.
Thank you, Satish, for the record. The several tools have been developed for low cost. I mean, in India, everything has to be low cost in order to ensure offtake. In the kind of work that I'm doing personally, there's been the development of a screen reader called Orca, which exists as an open source product. It had got to be kind of fine-tuned and extended for the Indian conditions, and that has been done to great extent. It's being used currently further work is also going on in that. Then we have developed software for training autistic children, and the offtake has been quite surprising even for us, because the parents of the children are now coming back to us and saying that these are actually excellent tools to re-engage these children. From another part of the country, Arun, who normally attends these meetings of Dynamic Coalition here, he was not able to make this time. Arun's team has been developing a bunch of tools, some of which he had actually exhibited in the Delhi regional IGF also. So if you're interested in more details, I can provide them by email. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Satish. For the other question, I'm going to turn over to Andrea Sachs. The question being, is there a conference simple guide to make sessions more accessible?
I think the term simple is unfortunate. No, there are several. In the guidelines that we compiled over the last year and finished off in the last few days, which will be submitted to the, what's the group? It's the, Marcus, help me. I'm not going to do it in the plenary, we're going to do it in the...
It will be a main session.
It's a main session. We're going to do it in the main session, which is going over what happened, and it will be used as an output document. We put in that guideline a list of other websites that did explain how they did accessible meetings. But I have another expert here by the name of Francesca Sesi-Bianchi, who is Vice President of G3ICT, Global Initiative for Inclusive ICTs, with whom I work quite closely, who organizes events in Washington, D.C. in conjunction with the Federal Communications Commission. And I just told her in sign language, which she didn't understand, but I have to train her on that she was going to say something about that, because she has checklists and she has worked very hard on helping me and also on making accessible events happen. May I turn that, Chairman, over to Francesca, please?
You're very welcome to, Francesca.
Thank you, Andrea. Well, thank you for the opportunity to speak about this. Yes, we have been organizing a meeting, an annual meeting, now it has become, in Washington, D.C. It's called the M-Enabling Summit, and it's a meeting on mobile technology for persons with disabilities and senior citizens. And yes, we do have developed accessibility guidelines, if you will, for our meetings, and these are the standard practices and best practices and good practices that we collected also looking at other accessibility meetings, because there are a number of them. I would say in different parts of the world. In the US, definitely, there are some established meetings, annual conferences, like CSUN, for example, at the University of California on accessible technologies, or ATIA, which is the Assistive Technology Industry Association annual meeting. So all those meetings have in place best practices, and we ourselves, we have implemented some of those, and we have been using also, first of all, we have been implemented accessibility services that include technology, because there are solutions available, and sometimes they are low-cost solutions. For example, we have mapping of our conference venue, which is done using GPS systems, or there are other, I can tell you, some other tools that we use. For example, hearing aids in each conference room. This is something that I haven't seen in this conference in particular. We have video remote interpretations as well, available for the durations of the conference. And of course, we have implemented an accessibility services desk, which provides volunteers. So we have sighted guides, for example, that help during the meetings to facilitate movements between one room and the others, for example. So all these kind of either low tech or high tech, as you want, as you may want, has been institutionalized in a way for our conference. So yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Francesca. Andrea, you wish to add?
I just want to say, without Francesca's help, in her experience in adding bits and pieces to the guidelines, we were working till 1:30 the other night, because we got input from many people who wanted to see things put in there. She even mentioned the fact that there has to be a watering area for guide dogs and accommodation to take care of their other needs. I hadn't thought of that. There are just loads and loads of things that we have to think about, so I'm sorry, it's not simple. This guideline that we have created is an ongoing work in progress. So it will change as we find out. And international facilities are not all the same, and the United States is fortunate that it has the American Disabilities Act, which really does put a great emphasis on the law saying you have to do it, and that's not true in other countries. I hope that helps. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Andrea, for this. So now we're going back to the question from Sweden, and the question, if I remind all of our panelists here, hopefully they'll have an answer, is I'm working for ICT with ICT for development, and I wonder, do you have any concrete examples or suggestions how a donor could engage in these questions? So Satish.
Record. Some of the work that I mentioned, which includes development of tools, including a full stack of the operating system Linux and the tools that I mentioned earlier, the screen readers. These have been funded by a Netherlands-based funding agency. So these tools are something that requires funding support because there's no revenue model for development of these tools. Another area where you might want to consider funding support would be development of resources, which are, for example, textbooks, training material, and some training software, which would allow, which are basically force multipliers, which would allow these technologies to get a better outreach. Thank you.
Thank you, Satish. Next we have to answer that question, Vashkar Bhattacharjee.
One thing, like I would like to give some of the example about the technology, how it's going. We are not talking about the low-cost technology. We are talking about the free and open source technology, which can be more helpful for the people with disabilities. Yeah, we are working together, like India, Bangladesh, to develop the free and open source technology, such as NVDA, skin reading software, which is we are developing for the one country, and same time it is useful for the all the South Asian country, like Bangladesh, Tamil, Hindi. So all the languages are now going to be added in the NVDA and eSpeak TTS, etc. Also, we are just seeing some more example, like whenever we are getting the technology, that is always changing, like the technology is changing, so we need always development activities for further improvement. That's why this is one challenge, that new technology is coming, and now like Android and other things, it's always a challenge. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Vashkar, for sharing this. Now we have Gunilla Astbrink, who is joining us remotely. Gunilla, you have the floor.
Thank you. Yes, I wanted to answer the question from Cedar. It relates to activities in Australia, but I'm actually from Sweden initially, so I know a little bit about how Cedar operates. In the Australian government, there has been a program called Disability Inclusive Development. This is through the the Australian Overseas Aid Organisation, AusAid. This might have changed recently with cutbacks in funding, but the idea was that any general aid package should include some impact on people with disability. So every project needed to state something relating to disability, how they would work with people with disability, if it's in disaster risk management, education, whatever. And so this is looking at it from a very broad perspective, but it reflects what we want to achieve from this workshop is to involve people with disability in the mainstream. And so that type of disability inclusive development agenda might be something that we can talk to CEDA about. I hope that's helpful.
Thank you very much, Gunilla. I'm going to first check if there are any additional questions with remote participation, and then otherwise I'll turn the floor over to the gentleman at the table. Deidre? Okay, well, there seems to be a technical problem with our remote participation moderator. Then we can go over to the gentleman at the table first. Oh, after. Oh, goodness, 5 people jumped and the mic is in your hand. Go ahead.
The what I had the marker up for was an offer to share information about tourism and disability, but perhaps since do it now.
So we can come back to this then afterwards, just before closing the session. Okay, so the gentleman at the table, please introduce yourself. Okay, so this corner seems to have not worked either. That's the flying mic will come flying to you.
Thank you. My name is Syed Qazi, and I represent India, from where Satish also comes. Just 2-3 points that I wanted to reflect is in a country like India, where Satish has mentioned also the number of disability people and all. The challenge in terms of digital inclusion has been, of course, because the whole ICT domain in India has been emerging as of now, because hardly a decade-old policies. It's only 10 years, down the line that the policies has been framed for that whole national focus. But of course, when there's a national focus on ICT, certainly disability as a priority area is certainly not on the priority list, because the government looks into in terms of infrastructure and those access and connectivity and all, struggling with those priority areas of digital infrastructure and connectivity access for the millions of people. But certainly this domain, of course, falls within the Ministry of Social Justice and Empowerment that we have in India also. But again, of course, I come from a not-for-profit organization that we are also, this whole advocacy issues we have been doing on digital inclusion. We have a program on digital minorities that we have been propagating for the last 3 years. Which includes, apart from the disabled population focus on advocating on those technology and best practices, we are also highlighting, of course, those minorities and the tribal communities and all, those who are out of this whole digital mainstreaming, keeping the larger picture in mind. But coming back to this disabled population, of course, what we are doing is this month, after we go back from IGF, we have a national program on sharing of best practices from the user's point of view of disabled people, disabled organizations. We have 2 days of program in New Delhi we are organizing on 9th and 10th of September this month. So we are looking at also best practices within the country from the user's point of view, of ICT point of view, what their views are. Because mostly when we talk about digital inclusion of disabled population, it's more about technology and solutions. From a top-down approach could be that this is good, this is bad, and things like that. So we are also looking at from the user's perspectives, of course, what the digital tools and applications have been relevant for you, what is required, what is not, in terms of accessibility as well as affordability point of view. So of course I can share the links and all of this report and best practices from this program that is coming up. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and indeed it would be very helpful to have those links, and perhaps could you send them over to the organizer, Gunilla Asbrink, who would then be able to include those in the report, or any further comments and questions. We have time for one more comment. I think that we are reaching close to the end of this session. We've got another 8 or so minutes. Shiva Subramanian, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm Shiva Subramanian from Internet Society India, Chennai. And while other countries, especially the developed countries, work on web accessibility, the same task in India might require a different approach or an expanded work. While accessibility groups work on digital accessibility, which is one of the tasks, you could also work on, I mean, we could also work on using the internet to create awareness about general accessibility issues, which are very, very basic in India. So like even the train stations and bus stations don't have accessibility engineering. So one is digital accessibility or accessibility of the web. And while you meet government and other people to work on this, you could also emphasize the basic accessibility issues. This could be a peculiar way of working in India. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Shiva Subramanian. We have Gunilla Asbrink remotely.
I just wanted to ask a question. This is probably to Marcus Kummer. In regard to the newly formed IGF support organisation, I gather that that organisation is going to be covering a lot of different issues, but I did hear that there could be some funding support, there could be some capacity training of participants, and I was just wondering if maybe this could be considered in regard to some of the issues that we have raised at this session in regard to involvement of people with disability in internet governance.
Thank you, Gunilla. Marcus, come up.
I have listened and I have taken note. We will have our first meeting of the executive committee tomorrow. As we said, we are not here to compete with the IGF Trust Fund. We will be complementary, and we will be here to step in and also fund activities that the Secretariat may not be able to fund. So this is definitely an issue we can consider, and Chengetai from the Secretariat is a non-voting member on the executive committee, so we ensure that we have a seamless coordination. But thank you for the suggestion, and I will bring up the question.
Thank you for this, Marcus. So we only have 5 minutes remaining in this session. I know that Gunilla was going to do a little wrap-up, a quick summary of what we've been hearing today, but I was asking a few of the panel members whether they wish to say a few words, and so Andreas Sachs will be wrapping up
the whole session just with a couple of comments. I recently attended the World Telecommunications Development Conference in Dubai this year, and with dealing with India specifically, because one of the bigger problems with persons with disabilities and getting online and being able to function, since a lot of the governments do put a lot of their functions online, is literacy. We've included that in question 20. The ITU has the ITU-D sector, the development sector, and a lot of work has been going into communicating on many aspects, from rural to disability, for broadband inclusion. And one of the biggest problems, of course, is in the developing world, should we call it that, is that broadband is not available. And with broadband, people can get online when some of these other smaller or bigger problems, depending on your view, have been solved. So I'd like to encourage the gentleman who just spoke to perhaps get in touch with me to maybe participate also in the ITU-D, and also to join me in the joint coordination activity on accessibility and human factors at the ITU, which I also chair. So if it's technical, I would like to have your help. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Andrea. And so, Gunilla, over to you for a summary, and then we'll probably have to close after that.
Much, Olivia, and thank you, everyone. I think this session has covered so many different topics on accessibility. We have heard from representatives from international organizations, we've heard from NGOs, we've heard from people with disability in what's happening in different countries. And really, there were so many issues, but not enough time to cover them there. I'm not sure how many people in the room, but we probably had an equal number of remote participants indicating the interest in the topic, and also I think probably that some people weren't able to actually physically be at the IGF even though they wanted to. So where do we go from here? We would like very much to see some progress, and there's a number of things that can be done. Certainly, the work of DCAD is very important within the IGF. The accessibility meeting guidelines is a very practical way forward, and we hope that the suggestion about having a MAG member reflecting disability will be ongoing. We look forward to getting maybe some feedback from the IGF support organisation if there is some support for disability involvement. And the list goes on. There's a number of other things. And it's the networking and sharing information, I think, that has been very valuable. And I think it reflects that we need to have more of these sessions in IGF. But we also need to remember that we have a number of different internet governance forums. And we need to ensure there is a disability involvement in them, and it becomes natural. For example, if there are policies developed, say within ISOC or ICANN, maybe we can look at a disability trigger just to see, okay, is there something there that might impact on people with disability? If no, fine. If yes, how can we work towards that? And it might be, we're looking at copyright, and people say, well, why is copyright important in the disability field? It's incredibly important when it comes to access to books. Until the Marrakesh Treaty last year, there was big limitations for people with print handicaps, print disability, to be able to have access to books at the same time as people who could read the books as they buy a book. So I won't go into detail about that, but I just want to finish off to say there is a lot more work to be done, and hopefully with everything we have put together in this workshop, we can move forward and we can continue this discussion in the various fora that we belong to. So thank you so much to the panelists for all that expert input, to the remote moderator, and to the participants both in the room and the participants remotely. I think this has been a valuable workshop. So thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you very much, Gunilla. And I was going to do that, actually, and thank everyone by name. Shadi Abu Zahra remotely, Grace Gataiga, Marcus Kama, Andrea Sachs, Satish Babu, and of course our two special guests today in the audience, Vashkar Bhattacharjee and Judy Okite. It's been a great session, very interesting, from someone who's just stepped in at the last moment and not knowing very much about this the whole topic. I think the only time when I've actually had been affected was on a time when I broke my leg once skiing. But it certainly is something that able-bodied people don't really think about as much as they should, because we are dealing here with a forgotten 1 billion people. And that's 1 billion people we should not forget about. So thanks everybody for coming here. Thanks to the people around the world, including I think Armenia, Portugal, Canada, Australia, the Cook Islands. For this, we can't even say good afternoon. We can only say good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and good night. This session is adjourned. Thank you.
Well done. Really good, John.
Yes.
Ah, now you have your, and you've lost your bit.
No.
Oh, I see. You're doing that.
Yeah.
Let me see what you've done. I've never seen anybody do that.
Well, that was one of
A regular adapter.
Yeah. This is one of these cables you get for all sorts of things.
Oh, how bizarre.
But they take up less space. That's all.